The Post was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service for its revelations about surveillance by the National Security Agency. We are proud of the recognition and especially proud of the coverage. We also recognize, of course, that there are sharp divisions of opinion about the source of the documents that form the basis of our coverage, Edward Snowden, and also about our role. And we'll talk about how this story came to be, how and why we decided to publish, how we went about our work, and how we think about issues of national security in our coverage.
It was obvious to all of us that a story of this magnitude was going to need a lot of lawyering and was going to need a lot of careful thought about how to balance the risks of disclosure with the necessity of bringing sort of big policy decisions before the public. And there are going to be really hard problems that are just strictly journalistic. How do you verify? Okay, you've got a piece of paper. It says that it's an NSA document, and it says that X, Y, or Z are happening. How do you know any of that's true? How do you know the document's authentic? How do you know that even if it's authentic, it's accurate?
As long ago as 2006, Senator Ron Wyden, a member of the Intelligence Committee, was warning publicly, but cryptically, about the existence of secret law under the Patriot Act, which is the counterterrorism law passed after 9/11. But he was bound by classification rules from going any further, from explaining his discomfort with the interpretation. It quickly became apparent that this was a program of vast scope in terms of collecting data of Americans, many of them law-abiding. And it did stun Americans. This was what Wyden had been warning about for so many years.
Ashkan, can you walk us through decoding some of these kinds of slides, and this one in particular? So how does a slide like this lead to a story on October 30th, 2013, last year, titled NSA Infiltrates Links to Yahoo Google Data Centers Worldwide?
This is essentially how the cloud works and how a front end of a cloud system for any of the major cloud providers works. There's a point at which the data between a user and the kind of cloud provider, say Google, is encrypted, and then there's their internal traffic, behind the scenes, behind the door. We kind of tried a bunch of theories, and it finally made sense that, in fact, they were tapping the private cables between data centers in the cloud. I could record this, our conversations with any of you, but it's not recorded or collected until,
and it's not surveillance in their view.
Yeah, until you listen to it. And so I think those are the things we want to, and so I think if the public realizes that that's the definition, I think a lot of people would push back and say, no, that's not actually what we thought we were approving, and we saw this with a number of the kind of comments from senators and policymakers that approved these programs. A lot of the comments and commentary was, we did not realize we were approving that.
I was the recipient of some very unhappy phone calls the day after the first PRISM story ran. That was the first story that Bart did that made clear that the government had access to all of this private data that the companies were collecting for other purposes. And let me tell you, the companies were really, really mad. And it took a while to sort of figure out exactly where this disjuncture was. But what I watched happen over the course, frankly, of months, was that industry gradually realized that they had been had. Like, they knew about some of the information that was being transferred and how, and I think it's now clear that a lot of it was happening through court procedures that were secret to us, but not as secret to them. But I can remember exactly the story that did it, the story they were just talking about the Google and Yahoo data links being tapped into overseas, and suddenly everybody in the tech industry at once said, uh-oh. Like, they didn't know that intelligence services had basically wired into their brains. And the companies were, by the time we got towards the end of the year, the companies were thanking us. They were saying, we're really glad we know this. They put in a whole bunch of new encryption measures. We don't know, we may never know if they're sufficient, but it's clear that the defenses are a lot stronger now on the corporate level than they were when all this began.
We've had stories, thousands of stories, in the time I worked at the Washington Post, that touched on something classified. So we can't let the stamp itself be the sole decider. We have to try to weigh what are the stakes here. There are stories that we've killed over the years that didn't even consider publishing. There's lots of stuff in the Snowden archive that we didn't even consider publishing. That was my first conversation with the Director of National Intelligence Office on the first document, was just so you know, everything between pages 17 and 24 we're not even considering. Because it's specific, it's operational, it reveals targets, it reveals successes, it reveals specific techniques, the publication of which would end them. Snowden has not continued to dribble out documents. He does not try to control the coverage or the pace of the coverage. The reason stories are still coming out is because there's a lot of material, and we are not casual about putting it out on the public record. I mean, for sure, we could go through this material a lot faster if I said, let's just dump the whole thing on the internet. We'll crowdsource it. The whole world can help us understand what it means. That's clearly not something we would do. It would be faster if I would say, let's take the 50 people in the newsroom who know the most about this kind of stuff. Let's give them all free access to the whole archive, and we'll all put our heads together. You know, the stories would come out faster. But because there's so much sensitive material in there, we've been much, much more controlled than that.